Question 1. In what ways does your media product use, develop, or challenge forms and conventions of real media products? This is our horror trailer, magazine, and poster that my group and I made. I found that these products did conform and subvert some conventions of real media text. In the process of making the products, I was able to play around with the elements of horror, such as iconography, mise-en-scene, and video effects in the post-production stages. This was done to try and make the products more realistic and creative. The main aspect that the audience needed to understand instantly is that the trailer was from the genre of horror. We needed to ensure that the main elements of horror were distinct. From the first rough edit, we noticed that there was a lack of blood used on Riley, our final girl. Although she was our subverted final girl, it was hard to recognise. Our rough cut feedback explained that the audience knew that the girl was being haunted, but didn't know if it was possible for her to survive or not. As a result, we added a scene where the final girl is covered in blood, which is a major element in the slasher horror subgenre. Horror trailers that we watched, like Scream, had the final girl covered in blood run by being hurt, or the strength that enlivens you, or the taking or giving of life, which was contrasted in our trailer. Our villain came back to life, and final girl was covered in blood, symbolising that she could essentially die, which we wanted the audience to think as it plays along with the Enigma code. Villain's costume. The villain's costume was inspired by The Grudge, where the villain was wearing white, which represents the ghost-like appearance, and that comes to haunt the former family. We combined this with Carrie's costume covered in pig's blood. The mixture of the two was to represent a former event that may have occurred in the villain's life. We completely subverted away from the ideology of the hidden identity, which was partially inspired by Mike Myers in Halloween 1978. But we deviated away from the idea of only seeing the killer once. Instead, the face of the villain was seen several times, in contrast to our initial trailer where the villain's identity was hidden. We wanted to create a controversial storyline, which was different from other films that we had previously watched, where the audience were always left guessing who the killer was. Instead, we used the concept of why does she want to kill the girl. This was try to urge the audience to see the film. We also used an iconic shot of the graveyard. The graveyard was taken from Texas Chainsaw Massacre, 1974. The mise-en-scene was to reinforce the idea that the villain has been brought back to life and plays a major part in the narrative. We also used a domestic setting to get a feel of real danger that the final girl was in. This was inspired by Scream 1996. We also used a public setting such as a tunnel where the audience could see cars and members of the public passing. This was inspired by the famous opening scene of Scream with Drew Barrymore. The necklace played an important factor when making our trailer. We wanted it to be seen and noticed several times at the beginning of the trailer and less towards the end, as we wanted the audience to make a link between the haunting and the object that motivated it, instead of just feeding them the information. A film that had a similar narrative is Drag Me to Hell, with The Button. My research, I learned that there were several films that are based around religion, whether it be an exorcism or religiously driven mother. We didn't want to use an exorcist scene as the narrative wasn't based around that. So instead we used a similar scene from Carrie where she was locked in a cupboard and forced to pray for forgiveness. We used religious iconography such as a Bible, rosary and candles. We also enforced the idea of religion with establishing the shot where there is a church in the background. Also, a few of the gravestones were present. Music and sound. Music and sound is a very important aspect of horror films. Personally, I feel most scared when the music reaches its peak in a horror film or horror trailer, as my adrenaline is built up along with the suspense and tension. Music can change the mode and emotion of the visuals and the character. Finding a soundtrack was fairly difficult as we aimed to stick to one track in the beginning, trying to find a piece that picked up pace at the right time. The first piece was very harmonious, which helped to create an equilibrium, and then started to build up the first time the villain was attacked by Riley, which I felt worked really well. An example of this is Poltergeist in 2015. The beginning of the track was very soothing, but then built up to be more intense. We then contrasted that when we added in a second soundtrack, which had a higher pitch which sounds quite screechy and uncomfortable, and worked well with the climax of our trailer. The same effect was used in Hitchcock's Psycho 1960, with psycho strings. Some of the other sound effects that we wanted to incorporate was some ambient sound to create a more realistic effect, and a heartbeat to emphasise the emotion that the final girl was facing, and more horrific screams to make the audience feel uncomfortable, and actual dialogue of Riley praying to make her seem vulnerable and desperate. When filming, we wanted to use shots and angles that were appropriate. All of the following are commonly used in horror trailers to help create suspense. For example, fast cuts are used to create pace and keep the audience engaged. An establishing shot to give the audience a sense of location. Candid angle to make the scene more dramatic and portray disorientation and madness. A low angle to give the audience a sense of confusion and powerlessness within the clip. Prom Night 2008 did this to make the killer look more intimidating. A head-on shot to demonstrate a person's appearance and sense of identity. When making our trailer, we wanted to keep to theories to ensure that it would be successful. The first theory that we applied was Todorov's. We started off the equilibrium as peaceful and normal, and then it got disrupted as a change of event took place. Then recognising that disorientation had taken place, in this case the villain stalking Riley, and then Riley trying to repair the damage, which was the usual stages in not just a horror but almost every trailer. We chose not to include the return of the restoration of a new equilibrium, as this would give away the storyline, and we would want our audience to see the whole film and have a constant question of whether or not Riley would survive. We used Levi Strauss's binary opposition to explore the contrast between two mutually exclusive concepts or things to create conflict and drive in a narrative. So to apply this to our trailer, Dead versus Alive and Good versus Evil. Our trailer conforms to the majority of codes and conventions of a horror trailer. As we use the company production at the beginning of the trailer, it also uses titles throughout of the trailer, release date and credits. The only thing that we subverted was not including the BBFC screen, which I did not think was necessary, as we included it on the poster. To conform further, we didn't place all the clips in order to make sure that not too much was revealed to the audience. There are many horror trailers that share the same conventions, for example Sorority Row, The Grudge and Carrie. That our poster conformed to horror conventions is through the main image. From previous research, we found that the villain was on the poster with their weapon. In this case, we only had one weapon, which was the knife used in the trailer. So we used the motive instead on the poster, which was the necklace. Like the Blair Witch Project poster, they had the symbol which drove them to their final destination, the house. The use of the necklace could also raise the question to the audience of why is this object so significant? We used a specific image as it had direct address to engage the audience, which it demonstrated on Paranormal Activity, the marked ones. Our teacher also commented that it looked like she's staring at the chain and at me. But we also subverted away from the conformity of hiding the villain or masking them. We also decided to use this image as the line reflecting on the villain's eye makes it look very demonic. In keeping with the topic of religion, we added a horizontal line to the reflected vertical line. This one formed an upside-down cross, which could symbolise the Antichrist, also referred to in other horror films. The title of the film was made the biggest piece of text on the poster, as we wanted it to be recognised and eye-catching. We chose to keep it in red, as the other text on the poster was in black and white, so keeping it in red would allow it to stand out further. We also chose to include the tagline of the film, Evil Never Dies, as it hints the message to the audience that the dead person would not be at peace as long as the evil, in this case the object, is still present. I also decided to keep the release day in red, as February the 14th is Valentine's Day and red is a colour associated with it. But instead we used dark red, which was used to symbolise blood. Beneath that we had credits. The font we used for the credits was quite small and long in size, as we had seen from other horror posters. We also chose to have the website in red, but in a smaller size in comparison to the title and tagline. The BBFC rating we chose to feature on the poster to suggest to the audience that the film will have some strong violence and disturbing scenes. We chose to do this on the poster rather than in the trailer, as we didn't want our audience to watch the trailer after seeing the poster and creating the panic. Horror posters tend not to do this, so we deviated away from this. However, older films such as Silence of the Lambs does have an R rating. After deconstructing Empire magazines, I found that making the magazine would be fairly straightforward. Also, knowing the codes and conventions from AS helped me when constructing this product. The image on the majority of magazines have the characters in their costumes, so we played along with this convention. The main image was the same featured on the poster and in the trailer. We also had to make sure there was an angle of gaze to draw the audience in. Other elements we included were the masthead, title, tagline, cover lines, magazine website, barcode and main image. The magazine conforms to the conventions stated, except for the date and issue price, which is usually above the M in the Empire masthead. Instead, we moved it below the masthead where it could be seen. The magazine product was from the horror genre. We decided to keep the colour scheme the same as the poster and the trailer, which was black, white and red. We used 3 different types of fonts on the cover, although it may seem like more, because we used different effects such as bevel and emboss to make each piece stand out. Mastheads on magazine covers should be bold and easy to read, so that the potential buyer and readers know the name and can repurchase a different issue. I also stretched the masthead across the top of the page. Bearing this in mind, I added a blood splatter on top of the masthead to place emphasis on the horror genre. Although it's not done on every magazine cover, it is done on the Hellboy issue with flames, and it's an effective way to appeal to the magazine buyers. For the cover lines, we placed them mainly around the image to draw in attention, but the main cover line was used down the left side of the page, whereas the smaller stories were used on the right. We used buzzwords like plus and special to appeal to the buyers. Other cover lines were based around the horror genre and what we thought buyers would like to read. The top strip of the page, I decided to place an iconic hint so in this case, a Bloody Valentine special. This suggests that the issue is released in February and relates to our release date as well. This can give a further insight on what lies inside the magazine. The overall layout of the magazine is filled with cover lines, which can be seen as a subversion, as many magazines are quite simplistic. However, the bold fonts were used to draw in buyers and stand out from other magazines that would be placed by it.